The morning of the wedding dawned with a deceptive serenity. The sun, a brazen voyeur, pried through the silk drapes, painting stripes of gold across the pristine white carpet. Ethan stirred, the weight of Olivia's sleeping form a familiar comfort against his side. He stretched, a slow, languid movement, feeling the satisfying ache in his muscles from yesterday's frantic preparations. The last-minute venue checks, the relentless calls to vendors, the almost comical struggle to assemble the fairy lights that now twinkled softly in the garden, a premature celebration. He glanced at Olivia, her face softened in sleep, her dark hair a tangled halo on the pillow. A wave of tenderness washed over him, a familiar tide that had been ebbing and flowing for the better part of 5 years. 5 years of stolen glances across crowded rooms, of whispered secrets in the dead of night, of shared dreams and interwoven lives. 5 years culminating in this day. Today, Olivia would be his wife. The thought resonated within him, a deep, resonant chord that vibrated with anticipation and a profound sense of completion. He'd always been a man of meticulous planning, of charting courses and setting destinations. And Olivia had always been the missing compass point, the magnetic north that had finally given his life direction. He slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb her, the cool air raising goosebumps on his skin. The house was quiet, the pre-wedding chaos yet to descend. He padded towards the kitchen, the floorboards cool beneath his bare feet, the silence amplifying the gentle hum of the refrigerator. Coffee. He needed coffee. And then, a long, hot shower to wash away the last vestiges of sleep and steel himself for the day ahead. He filled the kettle, the metallic clang echoing in the stillness. As he waited for it to boil, his gaze drifted to the kitchen island, cluttered with the remnants of yesterday's wedding preparations, discarded ribbons, half-eaten sandwiches, and Olivia's phone, carelessly tossed aside. He shouldn't. He knew he shouldn't. But the phone lay there, innocently, its screen dark, a silent invitation. He'd never been one to snoop. Trust, he believed, was the bedrock of any relationship, the invisible scaffolding upon which love was built. But a disquiet had been gnawing at him, a subtle unease that had taken root in the days leading up to the wedding. Olivia had been different, distracted, edgy. Her laughter hadn't quite reached her eyes, and her touch, though still affectionate, had lacked its usual warmth. He dismissed it as pre-wedding jitters, the inevitable stress of planning such a momentous occasion. But the unease persisted, a subtle tremor beneath the surface of his happiness. He reached for the phone, his fingers brushing against the smooth glass. He hesitated, his conscience warring with a growing sense of foreboding. Just a quick glance, he told himself. Just to quell this nagging doubt, this irrational suspicion that had no basis in reality. He picked up the phone. It was unlocked. Olivia rarely locked her phone around him, another testament to their supposed trust. He navigated to her messages, his heart beginning to pound a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He scrolled through the recent conversations, innocuous exchanges with bridesmaids, florists, her mother. Nothing. He was being ridiculous, paranoid. He was about to put the phone down when his eye caught a name, buried deeper in the list, a name he didn't recognize. Chris. A man's name. He clicked on the conversation, his breath catching in his throat. The messages were recent, from last night, the night before their wedding, his wedding. He scrolled up, his eyes scanning the words, each syllable a hammer blow to his carefully constructed world. Can't wait to see you tomorrow, gorgeous. You're going to look incredible walking down that aisle. Thinking about Last night. Wow. Last night. He kept scrolling, his hands beginning to tremble. The messages became more explicit, more intimate, detailing a clandestine meeting, a stolen encounter, a betrayal so profound it felt like a physical wound. He read them again and again, his mind refusing to fully comprehend the words, the casual cruelty of the deception. Olivia. His Olivia. The woman he was about to pledge his life to, had spent the night before their wedding with another man. The kettle shrieked, its piercing whistle shattering the fragile silence, a mocking soundtrack to his unraveling world. He dropped the phone onto the counter, the plastic clattering against the granite. He stumbled back, his legs suddenly unsteady, the room beginning to spin. Betrayal. The word echoed in his mind, a cold, hollow sound. He leaned against the counter, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He wanted to scream, to rage, to shatter every delicate vase and carefully chosen centerpiece in the house. But he couldn't. He was numb, frozen. The coffee forgotten, the shower abandoned. He stood there, staring blankly at the kitchen counter. The messages still burned into his retinas, the weight of Olivia's betrayal crushing him. The sun continued to stream through the window, oblivious to the storm raging within him, painting the kitchen in a cheerful, mocking light. It was going to be a beautiful day for a wedding, just not his. The initial shock began to give way to a cold, simmering anger. It wasn't the fiery, explosive rage he'd imagined he'd feel. It was something colder, sharper, more calculating. A slow burn that spread through his veins, leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. He pictured Olivia, still asleep upstairs, her face serene, her conscience apparently untroubled. The hypocrisy of it stung, a sharp, stinging slap. He'd spent months, years building this relationship, nurturing it, cherishing it. He'd poured his heart and soul into making her happy, into creating a life for them, a future together. And she had thrown it all away, casually, carelessly, for a fleeting moment of what? Lust? Thrill? He couldn't fathom it. He couldn't understand the motivation, the sheer audacity of her betrayal. He picked up her phone again, his fingers surprisingly steady now. He reread the messages, searching for some clue, some explanation, some hint of remorse or regret. There was none. Just casual flirtation, blatant lies, and a callous disregard for him, for their relationship, for their wedding. He scrolled through Chris's contact information. No last name, no social media links, just a number. He considered calling him, confronting him, unleashing his fury on the unsuspecting recipient of Olivia's affections. But what would that achieve? A shouting match? A physical altercation? It wouldn't undo the betrayal. It wouldn't erase the messages from his mind. It would just be messy. And Ethan, even in his anger, craved something more refined, more calculated. He wanted to hurt Olivia, yes, but he wanted to do it in a way that was elegant. He wanted her to feel the full weight of her actions, the devastating consequences of her betrayal. He wanted her to understand exactly what she had lost, and he wanted to do it publicly, on their wedding day, in front of all their friends and family. The idea sparked in his mind, a sudden, brilliant flame in the darkness of his anger. Revenge. Not a messy, uncontrolled outburst, but a carefully orchestrated performance. A public dismantling of their perfect facade. He smiled, a slow, chilling smile that didn't reach his eyes. He knew exactly what he was going to do. He was going to go through with the wedding, but not as planned. He wouldn't call off the ceremony. He wouldn't create a scene. He would let Olivia walk down the aisle, radiant and unsuspecting, believing she was about to marry him. And then he would introduce someone else. Someone who would change everything. Someone who would expose her betrayal in the most public and devastating way imaginable. He pulled out his own phone, his fingers flying across the screen. He needed to make a call. A very important call. He scrolled through his contacts, searching for a name, a number he hadn't used in years. Sarah, his ex-girlfriend, the woman he had broken up with to be with Olivia. The woman Olivia had always been subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, jealous of. He hadn't spoken to Sarah in over 2 years. He didn't even know if she still lived in the city. But he had to try. He clicked on her number, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. The phone rang, each ring echoing in the silent kitchen, a countdown to the unfolding drama. Please answer, he thought. Please still be there. On the 4th ring, she picked up. Hello? Her voice, hesitant, slightly breathless, was instantly recognizable. It sent a jolt of something, nostalgia, regret, through him. Sarah, he said, his voice hoarse, barely a whisper. There was a pause, a moment of stunned silence. Ethan? She said, her voice laced with surprise. Is that really you? Yes, Sarah. It's me, he said, his voice gaining strength, resolve hardening his tone. I need your help. He explained it quickly, concisely, his voice devoid of emotion, a flat, factual recitation of Olivia's betrayal and his plan for revenge. He didn't go into detail about the messages, the intimacy of the affair. He simply stated the facts. Olivia cheated on him the night before their wedding. He knew, and he had a plan. Sarah listened in silence. Her only responses soft murmurs of understanding, of shock, of disbelief. When he finished, there was a long pause. He held his breath, waiting for her reaction. He knew he was asking a lot. He was asking her to be a pawn in his revenge scheme, to participate in a public spectacle of humiliation. He wouldn't blame her if she refused. He wouldn't even be surprised. Ethan, she said finally, her voice soft, thoughtful. This is insane. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. I know. But why me? She asked. Why are you calling me? He hesitated. He could have chosen anyone, any woman he knew, any friend, any acquaintance. But he had chosen Sarah, partly because of Olivia's jealousy, partly because he knew Sarah was capable of playing the role he needed her to play, but also something else, something he couldn't quite articulate, even to himself, because, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, you're the only one I could think of. Another pause. He could almost hear her thoughts racing, her mind grappling with the absurdity of his request, the sheer audacity of his plan. And what exactly do you want me to do? She asked, her voice cautious, intrigued. I want you to come to my wedding, he said, his voice firm, resolute. I want you to be there when Olivia walks down the aisle, and then I want you to stand up. Stand up? She repeated, confusion evident in her voice. Stand up and do what? I'll explain everything when you get here, he said. Just, will you do it, Sarah? Will you help me? There was another long silence. He could feel the tension crackling in the air, the weight of his request hanging between them. Finally, she sighed, a long, drawn-out breath that seemed to release a pent-up tension. "Okay, Ethan," she said, her voice surprisingly calm, almost resigned. "I'll do it." Relief washed over him, a sudden wave of gratitude and something else. Excitement. Anticipation. He pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, his voice sincere. "Thank you. Just be here by noon. The wedding starts at 2. "Where is it?" she asked. He gave her the address, the name of the venue, the directions. He explained the seating arrangements, where he would be standing, where Olivia would be walking. He painted a mental picture of the scene, outlining his plan, his strategy, his meticulously crafted revenge. Sarah listened intently, asking clarifying questions, absorbing the details. By the time they hung up, he felt a surge of adrenaline, a cold, focused energy coursing through his veins. He had a plan. He had an accomplice. He had a wedding to attend, and it was going to be a wedding Olivia would never forget. He glanced at the clock. 7 a.m. Olivia would be waking up soon. He needed to get downstairs to play the part of the unsuspecting groom, to maintain the facade of blissful ignorance. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the charade. He walked towards the stairs, his footsteps light, almost buoyant. He was no longer numb. He was no longer angry. He was in control. And that, he realized, was a far more potent weapon than rage. He reached the top of the stairs and paused, listening. He could hear Olivia stirring in the bedroom, the rustle of sheets, the soft murmur of her voice. He took another deep breath, plastered a smile on his face, and walked towards the bedroom door, ready to begin the performance of his life. He walked into the bedroom, his smile wide, his eyes bright, radiating an almost unnerving level of enthusiasm. Olivia was sitting up in bed, stretching, her face still flushed with sleep. She smiled at him, a genuine, unguarded smile that momentarily faltered when she saw the intensity in his eyes. "Morning, sleepyhead," he said, his voice cheerful, almost too cheerful. He walked towards her, leaning down to kiss her forehead. She smelled of sleep and lavender, a familiar, comforting scent that usually calmed him. Today, it felt tainted. "Morning," she murmured, her voice still thick with sleep. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," he said, his smile widening. "Too excited." He watched her face closely, searching for any flicker of guilt, any sign of remorse. There was none, only sleepy contentment, pre-wedding jitters, and a hint of anticipation. The audacity of it was breathtaking. "Me too," she said, stretching again. "It feels surreal, doesn't it?" "Surreal," he echoed, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "That's one word for it." He busied himself opening the curtains, letting the sunlight flood into the room. Olivia blinked against the sudden brightness, shielding her eyes with her hand. "What time is it?" she asked, her voice muffled. "Almost 7, he said, glancing at his watch. "We've got a busy day ahead of us." "Tell me about it," she groaned, throwing back the covers and swinging her legs out of bed. Bridesmaids arrive at 9, hair and makeup at 10, photographer at 11. It's going to be a whirlwind. "A whirlwind," he repeated, his smile fixed, unwavering. "That's exactly what it's going to be." He watched her as she got out of bed, her movements graceful, unhurried, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface of his calm exterior. He wanted to scream, to lash out, to confront her with the messages, to shatter her blissful ignorance. But he held back, his anger simmering beneath the surface, his plan taking shape in his mind. He had to play the part. He had to maintain the facade. He had to lure her into a false sense of security, to lull her into complacency before he unleashed his carefully calculated revenge. "Coffee?" he asked, turning towards the door. "Please," she said, following him out of the bedroom. "And maybe some breakfast. I'm starving." They went downstairs, the silence between them thick with unspoken tension, with the weight of his knowledge and her oblivious deception. He made coffee, his movements mechanical, his mind racing. He had to act normal. He had to pretend that everything was fine, that this was just another wedding morning, that their future was still intact. He poured her a cup of coffee, handing it to her with a smile that felt forced, unnatural, a grotesque parody of genuine affection. She took the cup, her fingers brushing against his. He recoiled slightly, a subtle flinch that she didn't seem to notice. They sat at the kitchen table sipping their coffee in silence, the pre-wedding calm before the storm. He watched her, studying her face, searching for any sign of guilt, any flicker of remorse. He saw nothing, only anticipation, excitement, and a touch of nervousness. He wondered if she even remembered last night, if the stolen encounter had been so insignificant, so meaningless to her, that it had already faded from her memory. The thought stung, a fresh wave of anger washing over him. He forced himself to take a deep breath, to regain control, to remember his plan. Revenge was a dish best served cold, and he was going to serve it ice cold. The morning passed in a blur of activity. The bridesmaids arrived, a flurry of excited chatter and brightly colored dresses. The hair and makeup artist descended, transforming the house into a temporary salon, filled with the scent of hairspray and perfume. Olivia was swept away into the whirlwind of pre-wedding preparations, surrounded by her friends, oblivious to the storm gathering on the horizon. Ethan played his part, the supportive groom, the calm and collected fiancé, the picture of pre-wedding bliss. He smiled, he joked, he offered words of encouragement. All the while his heart was a cold, hard stone in his chest. He watched Olivia, her radiant smile, her infectious laughter, her effortless charm. He wondered how she could be so carefree, so happy, knowing what she had done, carrying the weight of her betrayal. He wondered if she felt any guilt at all, or if she had simply compartmentalized it, pushed it aside, convinced herself that it didn't matter, that it wouldn't affect their wedding, their future. He knew better. He knew that her betrayal had shattered something fundamental, something irreparable, and he was going to make sure she understood that too. The guests began to arrive, a steady stream of well-wishers, friends and family, dressed in their wedding finery. The venue, a sprawling garden estate, buzzed with activity, the air thick with anticipation and the scent of blooming roses. Ethan greeted them with forced smiles and polite conversation, his mind racing, his eyes constantly scanning the entrance, waiting for Sarah. He'd given her vague instructions, told her to arrive just before the ceremony, to find him, to wait for his signal. He had no idea if she would actually come, if she would go through with it. He was relying on a fragile thread of hope, on a desperate gamble that she would be as willing to disrupt Olivia's perfect day as he was. He saw Olivia across the garden, surrounded by her bridesmaids, a vision in white, her laughter echoing across the manicured lawns. She looked radiant, beautiful, completely unaware of the impending disaster. He felt a pang of something, not regret, not pity, perhaps a fleeting moment of sadness. Sadness for what could have been, for the future they had almost had, for the love he had thought was real. But the sadness was quickly replaced by anger, by a renewed sense of purpose, by the cold, hard resolve to see his plan through to the end. He checked his watch again. 1:45. 15 minutes until the ceremony. Still no sign of Sarah. Panic began to creep in, a cold tendril of doubt wrapping around his heart. What if she didn't come? What if she had changed her mind? What if he was left standing at the altar, alone and humiliated? His revenge plan a spectacular failure. He forced himself to take a deep breath, to push back the rising tide of panic. He had to trust Sarah. He had to believe that she would come through. He had put everything on the line, gambled his wedding, his reputation, his future, on this one desperate act. He couldn't back down now. He saw his best man, David, approaching, a concerned expression on his face. "You okay, man?" David asked, his voice low, worried. "You seem a bit tense." "Just wedding jitters," Ethan said, forcing a smile. "You know how it is." David chuckled. "Yeah, I guess so. But you look like you're about to explode." "Just excited," Ethan insisted, his voice tight. "Really excited." He glanced at the entrance again, his heart pounding in his chest. Still no Sarah. 1:50. 10 minutes. He was running out of time. He could feel the eyes of the guests on him, the expectant smiles, the hushed whispers. Olivia was probably getting ready to walk down the aisle, her father by her side, her veil in place, her bouquet clutched in her hand, and he was standing here, on the verge of a nervous breakdown, his revenge plan teetering on the brink of collapse. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking another deep breath, trying to regain control. He had to stay calm. He had to trust that Sarah would come. He opened his eyes and saw her, standing at the entrance to the garden, her gaze sweeping across the crowd, searching for him. Sarah. She was here. Relief flooded through him, a wave of pure, unadulterated relief so intense, it almost brought him to his knees. He signaled to her, a subtle nod of his head, catching her eye. She saw him, her eyes widening slightly, a flicker of understanding passing between them. She started walking towards him, her movements purposeful, confident, her presence radiating a quiet strength that reassured him, calmed his frayed nerves. He watched her approach, his heart still pounding, but now with a different kind of anticipation. The anticipation of revenge, the anticipation of justice, the anticipation of the moment when Olivia's perfect world would come crashing down around her. Sarah reached him, her eyes meeting his, a silent question in their depths. "Ready?" he murmured, his voice low, barely audible. She nodded, her lips pressed together in a thin line. "Ready," she whispered back. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was about to come. It was time. The music started, the familiar strains of the wedding march echoing through the garden. The guests turned their heads, their smiles widening, their anticipation reaching fever pitch. Olivia was about to walk down the aisle, and Ethan was about to unleash his revenge. The music swelled, the wedding march filling the garden, a triumphant fanfare that mocked the deceit at its heart. Olivia appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant in her white dress, her father beaming proudly beside her. She looked breathtakingly beautiful, a vision of bridal perfection, and utterly, devastatingly, oblivious. Ethan stood at the altar, his face composed, his smile fixed, his eyes locked on Olivia as she began her slow, deliberate walk towards him. Each step she took felt like a hammer blow to his heart. Each beat of the music a mocking reminder of the vows she was about to make, the promises she was about to break. He watched her approach, her eyes sparkling with happiness, her smile widening as she drew closer. He could see the love in her eyes, the genuine affection, the unwavering belief that she was about to marry the man of her dreams. The hypocrisy of it was almost unbearable. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms, fighting back the urge to scream, to stop her, to expose her betrayal right there and then. But he held back. He had to wait. He had to let her come to him. He had to let her believe, for just a few more moments, that everything was perfect, that her secret was safe, that her deception would go undetected. Sarah stood beside him, a silent presence at his side, her gaze fixed on Olivia, her expression unreadable. He could feel her tension, her anticipation, her readiness to play her part. He glanced at her, a silent communication passing between them. She nodded imperceptibly, her eyes telling him she was ready. Olivia reached the altar, her smile radiant, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. Her father kissed her cheek, placed her hand in Ethan's, and stepped back, taking his place in the front row. Ethan took Olivia's hand, his fingers closing around hers, his touch cold, detached. She didn't seem to notice. She was too caught up in the moment, too consumed by her own happiness. The officiant began to speak, his voice booming across the garden, reciting the familiar words of the wedding ceremony. Ethan barely heard him. His focus was entirely on Olivia, on her oblivious joy, on the impending moment of revelation. The officiant reached the part about objections. If anyone here has any just cause why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, he intoned, his voice echoing across the silent garden, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. A dramatic pause hung in the air, the traditional, almost theatrical pause that usually passed without incident. But not today. Today, the pause was pregnant with tension, charged with anticipation, heavy with the unspoken secret that hung between Ethan and Olivia. Ethan took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. The moment of truth. The moment of reckoning. He squeezed Olivia's hand, his grip tightening almost painfully. She looked at him, a flicker of confusion in her eyes, her smile faltering slightly. And then Sarah spoke. Her voice, clear and strong, cut through the silence, shattering the fragile pretense of happiness, ripping apart the carefully constructed facade of their perfect wedding. I object. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, a wave of shock and disbelief washing over the garden. All eyes turned to Sarah, standing calmly beside Ethan, her gaze fixed on Olivia, her voice unwavering. Olivia's smile vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief, her eyes widening, her face paling. She stared at Sarah, her mouth opening and closing, her voice failing her. What are you doing? She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan remained silent, his gaze fixed on Olivia, his expression unreadable. He could feel the tension in her hand, the sudden tremor that ran through her body. He could see the fear in her eyes, the dawning realization that her secret was about to be exposed. The officiant, visibly flustered, stammered, "Madam, I must ask you to state your reason for this objection." Sarah stepped forward, her voice clear and steady, her gaze unwavering. "I object," she repeated, her voice echoing across the stunned silence. "Because Olivia cheated on Ethan last night." The words hung in the air, heavy and damning, a public accusation of betrayal that shattered the festive atmosphere, turning the joyous celebration into a scene of public humiliation. Olivia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. She looked at Ethan, pleadingly, desperately, searching for some sign of denial, some indication that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But Ethan's face remained impassive, his gaze cold, unwavering, confirming her worst fears. He knew everything. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Is this true?" He finally spoke, his voice low, controlled, devoid of emotion. "Yes, Olivia," he said, his words cutting through the silence like shards of ice. "It's true. I know everything." Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes, streaming down her face, blurring her makeup, dissolving her carefully constructed bridal image. She looked around at the stunned faces of her guests, her friends, her family, their shocked expressions reflecting her own humiliation and despair. She had been publicly exposed, her betrayal laid bare for all to see. Her perfect wedding day turned into a public spectacle of shame. She turned back to Ethan, her eyes pleading, her voice breaking. "Ethan, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. It's not what you think." "Oh, I think it is, Olivia," Ethan said, his voice cold, hard, unforgiving. "I think it's exactly what it looks like. You cheated on me the night before our wedding with another man." He paused, letting his words sink in, letting the full weight of her betrayal crush her. Then he turned to Sarah, taking her hand in his grip firm, possessive. "And that's why," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound resolve, "I invited someone else." He looked at Sarah, his eyes meeting hers, a silent understanding passing between them. Then he turned back to the stunned crowd, his voice clear and strong, announcing his final, devastating decision. "I can't marry Olivia," he said, his voice echoing across the silent garden. "But I'm not going to let this beautiful venue, this beautiful day, go to waste." He paused, taking a deep breath, his gaze sweeping across the shocked faces of his guests. "So," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound conviction, "I'm going to marry Sarah instead." The silence that followed Ethan's announcement was deafening, absolute. The stunned guests remained frozen, their faces masks of disbelief, their whispers abruptly cut short. Olivia stood motionless, tears streaming down her face, her body trembling, her world collapsing around her. Sarah stood beside Ethan, her hand in his, her gaze steady, resolute, a quiet strength emanating from her presence. The officiant stood speechless, his mouth agape, his wedding ceremony script clutched uselessly in his hand. Ethan broke the silence, his voice clear, calm, and surprisingly steady. "Sarah," he said, turning to her, his eyes meeting hers, a flicker of warmth replacing the cold resolve in his gaze. "Will you marry me?" Sarah looked at him, her eyes searching his, her expression a mixture of surprise, hesitation, and something else. Hope. She'd come here to help him with his revenge, to play a part in his dramatic spectacle. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't anticipated this sudden, unexpected turn of events. But as she looked into Ethan's eyes, she saw something genuine, something real, something beyond the anger and the revenge, something that resonated with a deep, unspoken connection between them. She saw a glimmer of hope, a chance for something new, something unexpected, something perhaps even better than what he had lost. A slow smile spread across her face, a genuine, heartfelt smile that lit up her eyes, chasing away the shadows of doubt and hesitation. "Yes, Ethan," she said, her voice soft but firm, filled with a newfound conviction. "Yes, I will marry you." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd again, followed by a hesitant murmur, a slow, dawning realization that this was not a joke, not a performance, but a genuine, albeit utterly unexpected, turn of events. Ethan turned back to the officiant, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Well," he said, his voice regaining its usual warmth, a hint of humor returning to his tone. "Are you still up for a wedding?" The officiant blinked, stammered, then slowly, hesitantly, nodded. "Yes," he said, his voice still a little shaky. "Yes, of course, just give me a moment." He fumbled with his script, flipping pages, muttering to himself, trying to adjust to the sudden dramatic shift in the wedding proceedings. The guests remained in stunned silence, unsure how to react, their carefully constructed expectations shattered, their pre-wedding excitement replaced by a mixture of shock, confusion, and a strange, morbid fascination. Olivia stood alone at the altar, abandoned, humiliated, her tears flowing freely, her bridal dream turned into a nightmare. Slowly, tentatively, some of the guests began to stir, whispering amongst themselves, some moving towards Olivia, offering hesitant words of comfort, others turning their attention to Ethan and Sarah, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Ethan ignored them all. His focus was entirely on Sarah, on the woman standing beside him, the woman who had unexpectedly become his bride, the woman who had helped him reclaim his dignity, his agency, his future. He squeezed her hand again, his touch now warm, reassuring, filled with a newfound gratitude and a burgeoning sense of hope. He looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with a mixture of apology, gratitude, and a spark of something that felt surprisingly like love. "Thank you, Sarah," he murmured, his voice low, sincere. "Thank you for being here. Thank you for helping me. Thank you for saying yes." Sarah smiled at him, her eyes shining with tears of her own. Tears of relief, of unexpected joy, of a sudden, overwhelming sense of destiny. "Thank you, Ethan," she whispered back, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for inviting me." The wedding, or rather, the new wedding, began. It was different, unexpected, unconventional. It was born out of betrayal and revenge, out of pain and humiliation. But it was also born out of courage and resilience, out of a sudden, unexpected connection, out of a spark of hope ignited in the ashes of despair. As Ethan and Sarah exchanged vows, their voices trembling slightly, their eyes locked on each other, a new kind of love story began to unfold. A story born not of fairy tale romance, but of raw emotion, of unexpected turns, of the unpredictable, often chaotic, but ultimately resilient nature of the human heart. The sun shone brightly in the garden. The roses bloomed in vibrant colors. The air was filled with the scent of hope and new beginnings. It was, against all odds, a beautiful day for a wedding.